What's up, my Yu-Gi Bros? I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0. Welcome to Yu-Gi-Oh! And while I guess it's not business casual today, I was going to class. I didn't feel like putting in a huge amount of effort, but now I'm home, and I figured that I would shoot you all a report and deck profile from my regionals in Seattle this weekend. I was very happy with my performance. I didn't get top 8, I got 25th place. I went X2 this regionals, which I was very surprised about. That was probably my best performance at a major competitive event that I've ever had. And I had an absolutely great time, and I brought, you guessed it, Mermail Atlantean. So it was a 395-person regional, and I was expecting it to be very big and to be mostly ABCs. And so actually I was testing out builds until about 4 a.m. On Friday night. I suppose Saturday morning. I got about 2 hours of sleep before the event, and the whole time that I was testing, I was just thinking about how bad a meta call this was. It was really, the reason I was playing it was mostly because it was just what I had around, and I had a lot of experience with it. I hadn't had a lot of experience with the other decks that were available to me, or that I could have put in the work to get, and so I really just wanted to work with something I knew that I could complete in its entirety before the event, and something that I knew how to play. And so I took this, and like I said, I was really unhappy with the deck as I was testing it, and I was testing out basically every variation I could think of. And I was just thinking the whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about how bad the ABC matchup was, and how often it was bricking. And at the very last minute, I decided to just throw in every single variant of the deck that I had thought of, and make them into one 45-card deck. And after testing that out, I actually found that it was a really great build, and it performed excellently. I'll get to the tournament report in another video, but I wanted to start the deck profile as quickly as possible now that I've talked your ear off for a little bit. So we're going to start off with the 1 Diva and 3 Neptibus. There are obvious reasons why these are in the deck. Diva is a tuner and also summons Neptibus from the deck. Neptibus pitches your Atlanteans. To get your Atlanteans, most importantly, it pitches Dragoons. This is the most important card in the deck. The #1 priority of the deck is to put Dragoons in the graveyard. That is priority #1. You can play without Dragoons in the graveyard. I actually beat BA in game 1 without seeing Dragoons the entire game, but the card is absolutely necessary, and you want to get to this card as quickly as possible. Diva, by the way, is absolutely godly going first. Unless your opponent has a Veiler, they're going to have a bad time. To round off the Atlanteans, I played the double infantry and double marksman. I felt like more than 4 was cloggy, and I wanted to have a balance of them both because I wanted to be able to both take out back row and be able to take out monsters. There were matchups in which taking out face-down cards was more important, and matchups in which taking out face-up cards was more important, and a lot of matchups where it was important to have both of them available. I never found myself wanting more than the number that I had. There were a couple of times where I was like, yeah, it would be kind of convenient if I had another infantry or another marksman, but it was never like evenly one or the other, and it never really caused me any problems to not have any more than I did. And so I really liked the 2 and 2. I know that a lot of people are playing the 3 and 1 with the 3 infantry. I just really like having the availability of marksman because it is so good against back row and for setting up your plays when your opponent has something like emptiness, in which case you can take out a back row, take out the emptiness, and make your plays without fear of it. So I really liked the 2 and 2. Next, because like I said, the most important thing in the deck is putting Dragoons in the graveyard, I ran a Gen X engine, the 3 Undyne and the 1 Controller. The reason I didn't run 2 Controllers is because I don't run Pot of Desires in this deck, and I'll explain that more later. And so there was no chance of my banishing the first one. The other thing was I have a 45-card deck, so the likelihood that I draw 1 Gen X Controller, especially 1 Gen X Controller and 1 or more Undynes, is just very, very low. And so it was more likely that I am to get my Undynes, plus less likely that I was to draw a dead controller. I really liked the 3 and 1. The nice thing about Gen X Undyne, besides the fact that it is a thing that can trigger Dragoons even if I don't draw the Neptibus, is that unlike Neptibus, your opponent can't just send it to the hand or banish it off of Dragon Buster in order to get rid of it. They actually have to answer the Dragoons itself when it hits the grave. So they have to have the strike or the warning or something like that in order to negate Dragoons, as opposed to Neptibus where they could Kieran it back or something like that and it wouldn't trigger. So that's why I ran that. It really was to improve the rate at which I put Dragoons in the graveyard. And here are my discards in the form of my Mermails. My 7s are 3 Mermail Abyss Megalo and 3 Teus. I understand that my rarities are really horrifying. I've got the 1 black rare and the 2 secrets and the 1 ultra and the 2 ultimates. I'm sorry to those of you for whom that is very, very important. But really, I have been building up this deck piecewise for about 2 years. And so that's why it's in the shape it is now. But the reason why I ran this ratio, first of all, Neptibus or Teus is very, very good. It is really important in that if you draw into Dragoons, you want to trigger it, and so you want to be able to discard it off of something. So I always wanted something to discard Dragoons off of if I had a Dragoons in my hand. And so I wanted the maximum number of 7s without running lead, because I think lead is really dead. Teus also, if you open with Dragoons and Teus, you basically win the game. I could get to the combos on that once I'm done with talking through the deck, but that is the reason why I did that. And I really like Megalo because, especially with a particular tech in my deck, you can summon Megalo multiple times per turn and be in absolutely a-okay shape. And usually a person will only be running enough Ogres to get 1 at a time. And the other thing is that Ogre can only activate once per turn. And so your opponent would have to have something like the Ogre and the Strike in order to get rid of both Megalos if you summon 2 Megalos in a turn. And so I really wanted to have the availability of summoning multiple Megalos in a turn and always having Megalo available. So even though I didn't run Desires, I did run the 3 Megalo. And the rest of my Mermails started off with 1 Abyss Gund. Abyss Gund is fairly obvious, special summons Mermails from your graveyard, even when you discarded off a Twin Twister, which is something I pulled off a lot. I used Twin Twister a lot to discard Guns and get back my monsters, and the other 2 Mermails that I run are Lind and Abyss Pike because I run Sphere, and I'll talk about that once I get to Sphere. And my non-Mermail monsters with Moulin Glacia. Moulin Glacia is absolutely amazing going first. It is one of the reasons why the Dragoons Teus play is really, really amazing. I think I beat an opponent before they got to play probably 5 or 6 times because of this card on Saturday, and I often found myself siding it out going second because I would rather draw into a side deck card than draw into this because it was dead. I have just tons of water monsters as is. I'm running 31 monsters in the deck, and so I didn't necessarily need this, so I would side it out a bunch, but I would always have it in if I was going first, which I usually did against ABC if I could choose, and I almost always found myself being forced to go first against Blue Eyes. And then I also played a full Kaiju engine, starting with the 3 Gamma Seal, and then 1 Radiant and 1 Humongous. I do run Slumber in this deck, and so having the variety is really important. I ran Radiant and Humongous, partially because I was really indecisive, partially because they were the ones I had most available to me, and partially because I like the idea of if I didn't want to draw into one of these, I could hit the Slumber and hit both of them and only draw into Gamma Seals. And Gamma Seal is nice because not only is it the weakest one, but it is also a water monster that I could potentially discard if I didn't want to use it as a Kaiju. So that's why I ran this build. You'll notice I don't run Allure of Darkness. I just never found that I had Controller or Radiant in the same hand as Allure of Darkness when I was testing it. It was always either the Controller or Radiant was dead or the Allure of Darkness was dead. And so it also just wasn't worth running the double Radiant. And then finally for my monsters I have 2 Max Cs because this is a go second strategy and there's a lot of special summoning in this day and age, and making sure that you get into one of your plays plus a Kaiju is really, really important going second. That was my monster count. I had 31 monsters in the deck. Let's move on to spells. We'll start off with the triple Twin Twisters. A lot of people are running 2, but this is really important in the ABC matchup because this version of the deck, if you're going second, the purpose of this deck is to destroy, just devastate the ABC field and go in for the OTK if at all possible, and if not, set up to make sure that they can't put Buster Dragon or Dragon Buster on the field turn 2, and so making sure that you can get rid of their back row early on is really important. This is also really good against the Metalfoes matchup because even if you get rid of their counters and they get their scales back, then you can hit their scales once they build their scales. It's really important against the Magispector matchup. It's just really important to draw into this card as often as possible, and there are so many things that you can discard off of it that it is just an amazing card. I very infrequently found myself siding that card out. Then I ran 2 Instant Fusion, 3 was too cloggy. I only have 1 target because I thought that running extra fusions took up important extra deck space. I was absolutely wrong about that fact because I barely used my extra deck at all this tournament. But I really didn't want to draw into multiple instant fusions, even if I had another target for it. It is not useful to get multiple of them in one hand. And so running a 45 card deck, I did still draw this card fairly often, but I had other power cards that I could rely on without having the potential to clog. I ran Moray of Greed, I did not run Pot of Desires. And so the reason why I chose the draw power that I did was, first of all, Pot of Desires is really, really expensive, and I didn't want to put down the money for that. But the other reason, I would have done it if I thought that it was going to make a big enough difference in helping this deck. But the reason I didn't run Pot of Desires is because I felt like it was, for this deck, it was the worst kind of win more card. I found that when I played Pot of Desires, I didn't want to activate it until after I had gone through my combos, because even if you banish just one Dragoons, just banishing one Dragoons puts you at a massive disadvantage, because Dragoons is so central to so many of your good combos that I just did not want to take the chance of banishing it. So I would have to make my plays before I could activate Pot of Desires. And the thing was, if I was using Pot of Desires, it was so that I could dig for things that could enable me to make my plays, by which I mean things like Kaijus and Twin Twisters. And so Pot of Desires I could never activate at the time at which it would have been most useful, because I didn't want to banish Dragoons. And so I didn't run it for that reason. I ran Moray of Greed because I have just a ton of water monsters, and not all of them are always optimal to draw, and it could unbrick my hand. But I always have this theory about not running cards for the chance that you draw badly, because if you draw well and you get that card, then it makes it a worse hand. The thing about Moray of Greed, though, is that it can not only take suboptimal hands and make them good, but it can also take good hands and make them perfect. You can get rid of cards that you didn't want for the possibility of drawing into a Twin Twisters or drawing into a Kaiju or something like that. And so I really like this card's ability to optimize good hands and make bad hands good. So that is why I ran the 2 Moray of Greed and no Allure of Darkness and no Pot of Desires. Next, I ran 2 Interrupted Kaiju Slumber. I don't know what possessed me to run this card. It's really bad in so many matchups. Actually, it's really only bad in 2 matchups, and those 2 matchups are against the Metalfoes matchup and against the Blue Eyes matchup, and that's just mostly because you can't activate it with Jowgen on the board, and it's also bad in the Magispector matchup. And I only faced one Metalfoes matchup, and I didn't draw this card against Metalfoes, and 2 Blue Eyes matchups, and one of the Blue Eyes matchups, this actually came in fairly handy game 1, but I did still side it out game 2. The purpose of this card is against ABC. Not only does it clear the Dragon Buster so that you can potentially make the OTK, so that you can make the push and set up your board, but it also could next turn give you a Kaiju that would force them to tag out that Dragon Buster, which you could then capitalize off of if you got like an Abyss Dweller or something like that. So I really like the ability to clear the board. It was really good against BA, because if you put a Kaiju on their side of the field, their BA monsters can't hit the field, and so it forces them to go into Skarm, which you can prepare for and you can OTK through. And it was really, really critical during the Kozmo matchup, which I'll get to in the tournament report in the next video. I did find myself siding that card out a lot, because each matchup had a more optimal version of this card to run, but this was just the best one for generic times. Then we have the 1-of power cards. We have 1-for-1 in Soul Charge. 1-for-1 gets you Neptibus. It's pretty obvious what that's for. But it's also really good if you open with Undyne. If you open with Undyne and 1-for-1, it's just amazing, because you can discard the controller for 1-for-1 and just get even more extended plays and even more pluses off the Neptibus. And then Soul Charge, obviously, there's a reason we call it Skill Charge. If you play it, you win. And then my final power card is a 1-of Salvage. This is the card that really makes the triple Megalo absolutely powerful, because a lot of players are going to hit you with a Solemn Strike, or they're going to hit you with a Ghost Ogre. And if they do that, what you can do is you could just keep your plays going. You could just drop the Salvage, pick up your cards again, and start activating. And that's also really good with Vanity's Emptiness in the game, because if your opponent activates Vanities when you discard for something like Abysteus or for Megalo, if they flip the Vanities to make sure that you can't summon the Megalo, the Vanities will likely die off of your Atlantean, because I usually discard some Atlantean. And so I can get rid of one of their back rows or one of their monsters and take out Emptiness, and I could just salvage my Atlanteans back and summon Megalo again. And that was also true with the Ghost Ogre, is I had a couple of opponents hit my Megalo with the Ghost Ogre, and then I would just salvage back the materials and summon my second Megalo, and they'd still lose. And this was also really incredible in the late game, because it allowed me to reload things like Abyss Gund and stuff like that, and that allowed me to make a lot more extended plays. There were times when this was dead in my hand. It lost me one game because if it were an Upstart Goblin, it would have been better. But it was, other than that, it was really, really powerful. And then finally, I have my Abyss cards. I've got the Kraken, or I've got the Mizuchi, the Spell Negator, and the Abyss Sphere. This is, of course, for the OTK, and it's really good against Blue Eyes, and it is pretty much really bad against everything else. I really hated having to have this card in my deck because I drew it as often as I did, but it is, once again, really, really powerful against Blue Eyes, and it's even fairly good against ABC, but it enables the OTKs, and so I ran this in the main deck. I often found myself siding it out against slower decks, because I found that if I could get the OTK, I could usually get the OTK without Abyss Scale of the Mizuchi against slower decks, and if I couldn't get the OTK, Abyss Sphere was much, much better to go into anyway, and so I just didn't want to draw into this. I'd rather draw into a side deck card. Abyss Sphere was absolutely amazing. This was my MVP choice of the week. The reason why it's really, really good is because if you open with it, or if you can clear your board or something like that, against things like, especially against Pendulum decks and against ABC, if you have infantry in your hand and you have Abyss Sphere face down, when your opponent goes, when they put down a scale, or if they put down an Xyz monster to try and go into Dragon Buster, or something like that, or if they drop the Dragon Buster, you can flip the Abyss Sphere, summon Abyss Pike, and activate Abyss Pike's effect. Now, Abyss Pike's effect is negated, but all you have to do is get the cost off to discard infantry. You can pop their Xyz monster, or you can pop their scale, and that stops their play right there. That actually won me a game against Metalfoes, and it would have won me a game against ABC if it weren't for another factor, which I'll get to in the tournament report. But this choice was just absolutely amazing, and occasionally the opponent would, I would bluff a face-down spell card that I it wasn't going to be something I need, and my opponent would hit this and the spell card with Abyss Sphere, or with Twin Twisters, while I had other trap cards face down, and it was absolutely devastating, because I just flipped the Abyss Sphere and, discard and hit the Lind. Lind would be destroyed because Abyss Sphere got destroyed, and I'd summon the Pike, use it to discard the gun, get another Mermail monster, and then get a search for something like Undyne, which was really, really powerful, especially if I didn't open particularly well, because this gave me the option to search for Undyne during the end phase. So that is the main deck. It is 45 cards, like I said. I was just checking on my computer there. And why don't I get onto the extra deck? The extra deck, like I said, I didn't actually use a huge amount. There were a couple of cards that were really, really clutch, but other than that, I basically didn't go into the other cards. So, of course, the most important card in the extra deck is Elder Entity Norden. This won me 2 games against BA, just hands down, because of Abyss Dweller, and it also won me a game 1 against ABC, because I max-seed him and he kept his monsters on the field instead of going into an Xyz monster. I still got the draw off of the gold gadget summoning his monster, and that draw got me into Instant Fusion, which I used to go into Abyss Dweller after hitting his back rows with Twin Twister. I made Abyss Dweller and just ran over all of his cards, and there was just absolutely nothing he could do about it. He didn't get any searches, and the next turn I was set up and ready with the Abyss Sphere to hit his Dragon Buster, and then the turn after that I OTK'd. And so this card was absolutely amazing. For my Xyz monsters, we'll start with number 80. Didn't use this all day. I ran it in case I went into the grind game against ABC, in which case I could banish their parts from the graveyard, I could use it against BA, things like that. I just never went into it because Abyss Dweller turned out to be better basically every time. I would run 2 Abyss Dweller in my next version of the deck. Just every time I resolved this card, I won. This card was so absolutely incredible. One player totally forgot that it gave my Megalo another 500 attack, and he tried to slam into the Megalo and with a weaker monster. And it just turned out very, very badly for him. And another person miscalculated life points because they forgot that this gave all of my monsters 500 extra, and that allowed me to go into a lot of OTKs much more easily. I ran Castel. It won me 1 game against Blue Eyes. Other than that, I didn't go into it. 101, I won a lot of games with. Because it is basically like Castel, except it triggers Dragoons, which is really nice. It won me a game against Dark Synchro because I ate his Beals, which he made thinking that I couldn't kill it off of an infantry. The 3 most important of the rank 4s are Abyss Dweller, Castel, and number 101. I went into 101 twice. I went into Castel once, and I went into Abyss Dweller as frequently as humanly possible. For my rank 7s, I had Big Eye. Big Eye won me the game against Blue Eyes in the last round. Other than that, I didn't use it at all. Dracosac, I didn't summon once the entire tournament. Mermail Abyssgaios won me 1 match against BA, and I basically didn't see it other than that. There was an Odd Eyes player who beat me over in Abyssgaios, but other than that, like that was a card I used this card a couple of times, but not that often. I just did not use Dracosac at all. And finally, the Red Eyes Flare Metal Dragon, in case I almost had game but not quite, in which case I would just summon it. My opponent couldn't really do much because they had to take out 500 life points to get rid of anything or to play anything, and they didn't have 500 life points to pay. I never summoned this card. So the only two cards that I summoned in the entire day were Abyss and number 11 Big Eye. Moving on to my Synchros, Tatsunoko. This card was one of my MVPs. This allows you to control your graveyard with Diva, and make sure that you have the right number of water monsters from Moulin Glacier. More importantly, I used his Synchro from the hand effect a ton, because I would have spare Atlanteans in my hand that I hadn't used for Ineptibus play. And I would go into Tatsunoko, and there were a couple of games where I could go into Coral Dragon or Trishula just because of Tatsunoko's. I had Herald of the Arclight. It was going to be good for BA. I just never drew Diva against BA, so that wasn't very helpful. This card, in theory, is really excellent in a lot of rogue matchups, and it's good against BA. I just never had the opportunity to make it. Coral Dragon was absolutely clutch in a bunch of my matchups. It won me my last game against Blue Eyes. It won me a game against BA. It won me a game against Metalfoes. Did it win me a game against? Yeah, it won me again. This is just absolutely an incredible card. One Black Rose Dragon. The theory behind this was that I was going to be playing against a lot of Pendulum decks, and if you can just clear the board with against a Pendulum deck, you've got the game. But I never summoned it. I didn't summon it once. I might run a Moonlight Rose Dragon in the future, especially if I start running Gofu, which I saw on House of Champs channel earlier today. But this card, the theory for this card was really good. I didn't summon it once the entire day. Trishula, every time I resolved this card, I won. And then Leo, which is part of the absolute god combo of this deck. So if you guys don't know what the amazing combo is that involves Leo for going first, this combo won me, I'm pretty sure, 5 games the entire day. It's so amazing. So if you open with your Abyss and Dragoons or Diva, then you can make Leo and Moulin Glacier and end the turn with 4 cards in your hand. So the way that it works is you discard Dragoons for Abyss. Dragoons effect triggers, and so does Abyss. The Dragoons accesses your Deep Sea Diva, which is really important to this play, and then Mermail Abyss adds your Gund for future plays. You then summon Diva. Diva lets you go into, of course, your Atlantean Prince. Atlantean Prince's effect mills the second Dragoons in order to search for an Atlantean. I usually went for infantry in case I had the sphere play set up, but you really didn't. It didn't matter that much which Atlantean you went for, and then your Dragoons searched out Moulin Glacier. Now, my opponent often thought, it's safe from the Moulin Glacier. He has 3 cards on the board, or he only has 2 waters in the graveyard. He's going to have to make a lot of plays and commit a lot of resources to do that. However, I could just Synchro for 10, go for Leo, and I had 5 monsters in the grave. Drop the Moulin Glacier. I would then have 4 cards in my hand because I started off with, it was just a 2-card combo, and both cards replaced themselves. And so I would end with 4 cards in my hand, and my opponent would only start the game with 4 cards in hand and would have to deal with Leo, which was a really tough card for a lot of opponents to deal with. So that is an absolutely godly combo, and there was one game that I opened like that, and I didn't win. Every other time that I made that combo, it was game over before the game even started. Let's do the side deck. We have the 2 Ghost Ogre and Snow Rabbits. I saw this once the entire day. I probably would side in 3. In the future, just because it's really good in the Pendulum matchup. It's good stopping ABC. It's good in a lot of different matchups. It's great for the mirror. I just saw it once, and I can get to that in the tournament report. But it's a good card. I would continue to side it even though I didn't see it the whole day. I didn't see a lot of side deck cards. Speaking of which, I ran 2 DD Crow, didn't see it the entire day. I sided it in against ABC, I sided it in against Blue Eyes, I would have sided it in the mirror match. It wouldn't have been very useful in the Blue Eyes matchup anyway, because there were so many other ways that I could get around Return of the Dragon Lords, but I just didn't see it the entire day. I would find other things to side in. Moving on to my spells, System Down, absolutely amazing. I won my Kozmo matchup because of it. And it was great in the ABC matchup. I might run 3 in the future. Who knows? But I loved having this card. It was just a really easy out. And the thing is, when you're playing against ABC, all you have to do is clear their board once to go for the OTK. And if you don't OTK, you can set up against them so they can't reestablish. And if you get System Down, it just really guarantees that happens. And I frequently sided that in over the Interrupted Kaiju Slumber, just because it was so much better against ABC. I then ran one book and one Swords of Concealing Light. I couldn't decide between the two, and I didn't have access to a second Swords of Concealing Light anyway. And it turned out these were both really amazing. In the Blue Eyes matchup, I ran this. This was for Blue Eyes. This was for what's it called? Metalfoes. It was really amazing against both those. I also sided in against BA. I didn't see it against BA. I saw it in all of my Blue Eyes matchups, and every time I resolved one of these cards against Blue Eyes, I won the game, just because they couldn't deal with the plays that I made next because their Spirit Dragon was face down. And then for trap cards, ran 2 Anti-Spell Fragrances, didn't see it the entire day. Probably should run 3, but that was what I had available, and I wanted to make room for other things. Didn't see it the entire day. Royal Decree, also didn't see it the entire day. Didn't even side it in the entire day. This was basically for the Demise matchups. And then my final 3 in my side deck were 1 Solemn Warning, 1 Solemn Strike, and 1 Vanity's Emptiness. I wanted to go first against ABC to make sure that I could keep them from establishing a board. And so I'd always side these in going first against it, just to make sure that they just could not establish. And this actually came in really handy against Metalfoes. It won me the matchup against Metalfoes. So that is the deck. It is 45 cards. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, hit that thumbs up button. If you didn't, let me know why in the comment section below. I'm so sorry. All of my videos recently have been 20 minutes long or longer, but this was just, it was, I had a lot of weird choices that I made in this deck, and I wanted to explain all of them. I love the deck. It played amazingly. I'm going to be modifying it to play, of course, the Bahamut Shark and Tree Toad version of the deck in the future. But for now, this matchup was really good. It had a very good ABC matchup, even though I lost the match. In the tournament report, I'll explain why that happened, but it did everything it was supposed to do against ABC. And I just had a great time with this deck. It was a lot of fun. It was just as skillful as I always remember it being. And I was really happy with how I did. Thank you all for watching. I'm your host, the one, the only, the RJB0, and I got a jet. See you guys.